Cymbeline. Last time we discussed how Cymbeline, King of Britain, is not known as, like, when was it written. The date is not known. So, like, some scholars consider that it was probably produced by 1611 and it was included in the first folio. And there it was classified as a tragedy. So the main characters of Cymbeline are Cymbeline, who is the king of Britain, queen, Cymbeline's second wife, Imogen or Inogen, Cymbeline's daughter by a former queen, later disguised as Fidel. It means faithful, fidelity. Posthumus Leonatus, Imogen's husband, Cloten, queen's son by a former husband, Guiderius, Cymbeline's son, kidnapped by Belarius in childhood and raised as his son Polydore; Arviragus, Cymbeline's son, kidnapped by Belarius and raised as his son Cadwal. Now we come to the plot. Cymbeline, the Roman Empire's king of Britain, has two sons, Guiderius and years earlier as infants by an exiled traitor Belarius. The only child of Cymbeline left was his daughter Imogen. She has secretly married her lover Posthumus Leonatus, an honorable man of Cymbeline's court. Both lovers exchanged jewelry as a token. There is a double L there. And Imogen now with a bracelet and Posthumus has a ring. Cymbeline dismisses the marriage and banishes Posthumus, since Imogen, as Cymbeline's only child, must produce a royal blooded heir to succeed to the British throne. In the meantime, Cymbeline's queen is conspiring to get her son Cloten to marry Imogen to secure her bloodline. Now, the queen was plotting to murder both Cymbeline and Imogen, for which she took poison from the court. The doctor, the court physician, Cornelius. The doctor replaces the poison with harmless sleeping potion because I suppose the doctor had some heart. The queen gives this poison, which is actually a potion, to Pisanio, Posthumus, and Imogen's servant, who believes it to be a medicinal drug. Posthumus is now living in Italy, where he meets Giacomo, whatever you want to call him. Iachimo challenges Posthumus to bet that he can seduce Imogen, and Posthumus has praised her for her chastity, and Iachimo says that he will bring a proof of Imogen's adultery. He challenges Posthumus that he will, seduce her. Now they make a deal. If Iachimo wins, he'll get Posthumus's token ring, and if Posthumus wins, Iachimo will not only pay him but also duel Posthumus with a sword. So this is kind of disturbing if you think about it from a feminist perspective. And one might say that it's not without reason that Shakespeare is sometimes rendered a misogynist because of this treatment of women. But I suppose that this was the norm back in the day, and maybe he was just, showing the reality. However, his treatment is, I suppose, misogynist. Misogynist. Yeah, that is true. Anyways, Iachimo reaches Imogen. He hides in a chest in Imogen's bedchamber. When Imogen sleeps, Iachimo steals Imogen's bracelets. He also takes note of the room and Imogen's partly naked body so as to put a false evidence to Posthumus that he has seduced his bride. Iachimo actually sees a mole on the breast of Imogen when she was sleeping, in her bed, and she's kind of like not covered properly. Now, returning to Italy, Iachimo convinces Posthumus that he has successfully seduced Imogen. Posthumus, in his wrath, sends two letters, one to Imogen to meet him and the other to the servant Pisanio, ordering him to murder Imogen at the place where Milford Haven, where he has actually called Imogen to meet him. Now, Pisanio refuses to kill Imogen and he reveals this plot to Imogen. Now, Imogen, she disguises herself as a page boy Fidel and she goes to Milford Haven to seek employment. She disguises herself as Fidel, which means faithful. So it shows kind of how this allegation has affected her. The name that she takes is even evident of her trying to prove herself to be a faithful woman. So that is something. Now, Pisanio also gives Imogen the queen's poison, which he thinks as a medical drug to alleviate her psychological distress. In Cymbelin's court, Caius Lucius, a Roman ambassador, warns Cymbeline of the invasion of Britain by Rome. Meanwhile, Cloten learns about Imogen's meeting with Posthumus at Milford Haven. Cloten dresses himself in Posthumus's clothes and decides to go to Milford Haven to kill Posthumus, rape, abduct, and marry Imogen. Now, Imogen, while going to Haven, falls ill and reaches the home of Belarius, who was living along with his two sons, Polydore and Cadwal, whom Belarius has stolen and raised as his own sons as great hunters. So, in reality, they are like Imogen's brothers. And Polydore and Cadwal are actually the sons of Cymbeline, who were abducted by Belarius 20 years back, and they become fast friends to Imogen. Outside the cave, Guiderius or Polydore meets Cloten and they start fighting, and Guiderius beheads Cloten. In the meantime, Imogen takes the potion to get rid of her fragile state. When the men re enter the cave, they find Imogen dead. Now they prepare the double burial of Cloten and Imogen. Imogen wakes up because actually it was a medicinal drug, not a poison, and she finds the beheaded body of Posthumus as Cloten was dressed as Posthumus, you know. And Roman forces attack on the Roman forces they attack Britain, and Belarius, Guiderius, Avragus, and Posthumus all help Cymbeline in capturing the Roman commanders. The king does not recognize them. Posthumus and Fidel, who is actually Imogen, allow themselves to be captured along the Romans and wait for execution by Cymbeline in Britain. In jail, Posthumus dreamed of the ghosts of his dead family who appear to complain to Jupiter of his grim fate. Now, Jupiter himself then appears in thunder and glory to assure the others that destiny will grant happiness to Posthumus and Britain. Cornelius announces in the court that the queen is dead, and while dying, she has confessed her ill plot about her husband and Imogen. Cymbeline is relieved at this news. Cymbeline prepares to execute Posthumus and Fidel, and but when he saw Fidel, he paused because he thought she was familiar. Fidel notices Posthumus's ring on Iachimos, who was also captured, and she sees that ring on his finger and abruptly demands to know how he got it. Iachimo reveals all the truth about his pet and how he could not seduce her and how he cheated on Posthumus. So now to hear this, Posthumus acknowledged his wrongfulness of killing Imogen. Imogen throws herself on Posthumus, but he thought her to be a page boy and knocks her down. So yeah, and like Posthumus has yet not recognized her. Now Pisanio explains that Fidel is actually Imogen. Belarius makes his own happy confession, revealing Guiderius and Arviragus as Cymbeline's own two long-lost sons. Cymbeline forgives Belarius and all the Romans, including Lucius and Iachimo. Imogen is now free to marry Posthumus, as her brothers will now become the heirs, because now she doesn't have that pressure to marry into royalty, because now her brothers are discovered and she doesn't have to be the heir. So that is something. Cymbeline gives a great feast to everybody. And this is how, the tale ends. And yeah, there are some problematic elements to it also. I mean, it's not perfect. Not all the characters are perfect. They've done some pretty bad things. However, this play has its good elements as well. Characters, vivid characters, the plot, and everything, and how the plot brings forth the story forward, and it brings out the various twists and turns in the plot, brings out the different shades in the characters, kind of show us that human nature is predominated by the situations and circumstances in the person's life, And I think Shakespeare did a great job of doing that. How, if things are going well, people most of the people have their good nature turned up. I mean, not everybody, but most of them. And this is shown in a lot of his plays. So I think this is something that is quite true in some ways. And the way Shakespeare shows it in his plays is also quite commendable. So now we come to The Winter's Tale, and actually it was originally published in the first folio of 1623. It was grouped among the comedies. However, some modern editors have relabeled the play as one of Shakespeare's late romances. Some critics consider it to be one of Shakespeare's problem plays, obviously, because the first three acts are filled with intense psychological drama, while the last two acts are comedic and supply a happy ending. So, yeah, I think I just repeated the slide. The main plot of The Tale is taken from Robert Greene's pastoral romance Pandosto, published in 1588, very important for Ned. The play opens with Leontes, the king of Sicilia, entertaining his old friend Polixenes, the king of Bohemia. Leontes jealously mistakes the courtesy between his wife Hermione and Polixenes as a sign of Hermione's adultery. So, yeah, Leontes is jealous of his friend. In a fit of jealousy, he attempts to have Polixenes killed, but Polixenes escapes with Camillo, Leontes' faithful counselor, whom Leontes has sent to kill him. So, yeah, that is something. The counselor has some heart and he does not kill Polixenes. The pregnant Hermione is then publicly humiliated and thrown in jail, despite her protests of innocence. When the child, a girl, is born, Leontes rejects the child out of hand and gives her over to Antigonus, the husband of Hermione's attendant Paulina. Antigonus is instructed to abandon the baby in some wild place. Having learned of his mother's mistreatment, Leontes' beloved son Mamilius dies, and Hermione too is carried out and reported dead. Having lost everyone important to him and having realized the horror and the error of his ways, Leontes is left to his solitary despair. Meanwhile, the baby girl named Perdita is brought up by a shepherd and his wife in Polixenes' kingdom of Bohemia. So, yeah, Leontes actually loses everything. She appears in Act 4 as a beautiful and young shepherdess who has been discovered by Polixenes' son, Florizel. Needless to say, her true status is eventually discovered once she and Florizel have arrived at Leontes' court in Sicilia. In a climactic ending, Hermione is discovered to be alive after all. She had been sequestered by Paulina for some 16 years until the time for reunion and reconciliation arrived. So, yeah, in a way, we see Hermione is also alive. Leontes is shown a seeming statue of Hermione, so lifelike that one might imagine it breathes. Now, the statue, which is actually not a statue, it comes to life, and Hermione is seen to have aged during her years of separation and waiting. Leontes, to his intense joy, realizes that he loves his wife more than ever. The recovery of the daughter he attempted to kill is no less precious, and everything is forgiven. All is well now. All wells that ends well. So that is something, and I mean, The Winter's Tale has its problematic elements, and at the end of the play, everything goes on well. But you can see the similar theme of situations and circumstances dictating people's nature, and this thing has been observed and captured by Shakespeare quite well, one might say. I mean, Leontes realizes that he loves his wife and his daughter after he loses everything, and after the separation, his love grows. And I mean, had he not taken any action, that hatred and that jealousy would have been brewing inside of him, and it would have affected his relationship with his wife. It would have been a silent killer. However, this drastic step or this drastic event in his life actually redefined his character and remolded him into seeing the error of his ways and realizing what in life really matters. And this is something that one can see in most of Shakespeare's plays. Most of his plays are centered around the themes of separation, anxiety, and loss, and how those things remodel a character, remodel a behavior, progress the plot forward, and give a new perspective to the viewers and their characters in the play. So that is something that is an enlightening experience, because the reader or the audience is seeing the character's growth. Meanwhile, the character is also observing that metacognition thing is also happening. So that is something that is quite interesting to see in Shakespeare's plays, and which is the reason why his plays are still relevant and are used in a lot of pop culture. So that is something. Now we come to The Tempest, which was written in 1610, 1611, and it is supposed to be the last play of Shakespeare written alone. It is set in Milan and an unknown island. In Stephen Orgell's article, Prospero's Wife, Orgell addresses the issue of women in The Tempest and how they are all but omitted from the play's text. The only female character in the entire play is Miranda, Prospero's daughter. Miranda's mother is completely absent from the play and is only talked about once when Prospero, addressing Miranda, says, "Thy mother was a piece of virtue, and she said, Thou wast my daughter, and thy father was the Duke of Milan." So he is kind of being cheeky. Somehow he's just saying that, asserting that, yeah, you are my daughter because your mother said so. So that is something. Other than that, this play doesn't have many women. And the plot is that the magician Prospero, the rightful Duke of Milan, and his daughter Miranda have been stranded for 12 years on an island after Prospero's brother Antonio, who is jealous of Prospero, aided by Alonso, the king of Naples, deposed him. So now Prospero and his 3-year-old daughter Miranda were set adrift. They were like sent away. And he did it with the help of Alonso, the king of Naples. So yeah, that is something. Now fortunately, Gonzalo, Alonso's counselor, had secretly supplied their boat with some food, fresh water, rich garments, linens, stuff, and necessities, and obviously books. Due to the great learning of magical powers, Prospero is reluctantly served by a spirit, Ariel. Prospero had rescued Ariel from a tree in which he had been trapped by the cruel witch Sycorax after he had refused to obey her. Prospero maintains Ariel's loyalty by repeatedly promising to release the airy spirit from servitude. Sycorax had been exiled from Algiers to the island for wreaking havoc with her magic and had died before Prospero's arrival. And yeah, there are a lot of post-colonial theories about this play also, how the treatment of other people on the island and Prospero's arrival, they were compared to like the colonization of the by the English of the various countries. So that is a theme that you can see in this play. For instance, Caliban, who was the son of Sycorax, he was a deformed monster and the only non-spiritual inhabitant before the arrival of Prospero. Like Caliban is, compared to the colonized people. He is like the Oriental, and Prospero is the Occidental. And for more information about this, you can read Edward Said's works, Culture and Imperialism, and other post-colonial works. So yeah. Now, Caliban was adopted by Prospero. While Caliban taught Prospero how to survive on the island, Prospero and Miranda taught Caliban religion and their own language. Much like the colonizers. Actually, this question is asked also in the NET exam, which is the reason why I'm telling you. Once Caliban attempts rape of Miranda, he was compelled by Prospero to serve as a slave. I mean, Prospero does his magic on him as well. so that he could be his slave. Now, Caliban views Prospero as a usurper, one who seizes the power and decides to ruin Prospero, and his daughter Miranda. Prospero asks Ariel to take the shape of a sea nymph and make himself invisible to all but Prospero. Prospero asks Ariel to bring a tempest in the sea and set fire to the mast of the ship in which Alonso, Ferdinand, Sebastian, Antonio, Gonzalo, Stefano, and Trinculo were on their way to Italy. Prospero said to his daughter Miranda that he raised the tempest in order to make things right, as it was before the 12 years. He wants everything to become the way it was, and punish, in a way, punish his brother also and get his dukedom back. So, yeah, Prospero makes sure that everyone in the ship is safe, and they come to the island safely, and they are separated from each other into small groups. Miranda and Ferdinand, son of Alonso, are immediately, in the trance of love, because just Miranda sees Ferdinand for the first time, and he is like the only man she sees she sees, and besides Caliban and her father, the only young man. So eventually she falls in love, which was the plan of her father. Prospero finds his plan of marrying his daughter working, but he decides that he must upset some things temporarily in order to prevent their relationship from developing too quickly. That is something very interesting and quite thoughtful of Shakespeare to include this element of, resting a relationship, like making a relationship not go too fast, making it grow gradually, which is quite important in a lot of ways and quite relevant if you think about it. Prospero accuses Ferdinand for being merely the Prince of Naples and threatens him with imprisonment. When Ferdinand draws his sword, Prospero charms him and leads him off to prison. Now, Prospero only performs one act of magic himself on the stage, which is disarming Ferdinand, causing his nerves to become in their infancy again. Like he becomes like a child, he can't work with his muscles. On the other part of the island, Alonso's brother, which is Antonio, Gonzalo, and other miscellaneous lords, give thanks for their safety but are worried about the safety of Ferdinand, who is safe actually. Stefano, Trinculo, and Caliban, who are fully drunk, are now made to fight with each other by Ariel. Caliban plans that if they kill Prospero, they will take his daughter and will set Stefano as the king of Ireland. So they are having their own thing. Before they execute their plan, they were enchanted by the music of Ariel and they follow the music. Again, very important. Alonso, Gonzalo, Sebastian, and Antonio are tired of their journey and pause to rest. Antonio and Sebastian planned to kill Alonso and Gonzalo in the evening as they were tired. Prospero is now softened towards Ferdinand and welcomes him in his family as the soon-to-be husband of Miranda. Prospero just makes him, struggle a little bit, and eventually he accepts him. He reminds Ferdinand that Miranda's virgin knot is not to be broken until the wedding has been officially solemnized, because that was the order of the day in those times. The spirits of the island assume the shape of Ceres, Juno, and Iris and perform a short mask celebrating the rites of marriage. Very important. The names of the spirits. Prospero tricks Stefano, Trinculo, and Caliban by hanging beautiful clothing in his cell. When looking for Prospero, these three enter in the cell of Prospero and decide to steal the clothing. Suddenly, they are driven by a pack of spirits sent by Prospero and Ariel. Prospero asks Ariel to bring all the characters together. He forgives Alonso, Antonio, and Sebastian for their treachery. Alonso and his companions are amazed by the miracle of Ferdinand's survival. Ferdinand tells his father about his marriage. Ariel returns with both Swain and Marinas. At Prospero's bidding, Ariel releases Caliban, Trinculo, and Stefano. Prospero invites Alonso and the others to stay for the night and tells the tale of his life in the past 12 years. All return to Italy. Prospero is restored to his dukedom. Prospero gives one last task to Ariel to make sure the seas are calm of the return voyages before setting him free. Prospero delivers an epilogue to the audience asking them to forgive him for his wrongdoing, which is considered to be something which was the address of Shakespeare to his audience. I mean, it was like Shakespeare was saying a goodbye speech to his audience and asking them for forgiveness for anything wrong that he had done in his whole career. And that is why Prospero's character and this play has a lot of significance, because it kind of is like a goodbye present of Shakespeare. It is considered as the goodbye present of Shakespeare to his audience. So that is something. Now, the character Antonio appears in the following plays of Shakespeare, which is The Merchant of Venice, Twelfth Night, The Tempest, Much Ado About Nothing. It can be asked, so just remember. And the character Sebastian appears in these plays of Shakespeare: Two Gentlemen of Verona, Julia disguises as Sebastian, Twelfth Night, brother of Viola, The Tempest, Alonso's brother. Important quotes from The Tempest. You taught me language, and my profit on it is I know how to curse. Caliban to Prospero. Hell is empty and all the devils are here. Yeah. Oh, wonder how many godly creatures are there here. How beauteous mankind is. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it. Miranda says this when she sees Ferdinand for the first time. Any human being for the first time, I suppose, of the opposite sex. So, yeah. And the title Brave New World of Aldous Huxley has been taken from this line, actually. It can be asked, so just remember. Full fathom find thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Nothing of him that doth fades, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and stand. Good wombs have borne bad sons. Again, Miranda. Miranda is quite clever. And as the morning steals upon the night, melting the darkness, so their rising senses begin to chase the ignorant fumes that mantle their clearer reason. Very beautiful quotes. And there are other minor works by Shakespeare, and we will continue with it. But for today, I think this is enough. We covered around three plays, and I hope you liked it. I hope it helps you in your exams. And if you liked it, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, share the video, and I will meet you all in the next video. Thank you.